we're back. One more segment on this episode of Inside Black and Gold. And we are going to talk pretty much exclusively about a guy who is not yet back in Marshon Lattimore. He's not back because he was not at the first day of OTA's practice. Now, that's not unusual because he wasn't there last year either. A lot of veteran players have stopped going to these, and it really does kind of emanate from that 2020 season when they canceled them. And a lot of players were like, if I can do this on my own and you tell me it's voluntary, then don't get mad at me for doing the work on my own, right?
The problem is when you have guys like Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu there, and it's like, well, what the hell's your excuse then?
Yeah, Cam ruins the curve for everybody. We can't
Everyone.
hold people to that standard. But you can criticize it, and Bobby Hebert is always on top of that. So we're going to hear from Bobby. He's got some strong takes. Just like he had strong takes on Mike last year, not being there for the first set of OTAs, and then Mike showed up. So who knows? Maybe it'll happen again. Right. And we saw how everything fell apart with Mike. So, as you look back on Bobby's takes from last year, maybe he had a good point. So we're going to hear from him. First, I want to hear from DA, because one of the things that DA made clear yesterday, and he made clear the day before, is he has spoken to Marshon. They had a positive conversation. And it sure sounds like, barring anything crazy, barring a kind of a Godfather offer, their plan is to keep him on the roster for 2024. And Jeff Duncan wrote a column today basically saying that. And this is what DA said when he was asking why he felt the need to have that conversation.
Based on that conversation, do you expect to see him before minicamp?
No, I wouldn't. And I wouldn't say that that's been uncommon since probably about 2020. And so I wouldn't expect that. I know he's working hard. I know he's getting himself in the best shape that he can get into. And so, like I said earlier, when he's back, we'll embrace him with open arms, and we'll start working on getting him better for next year.
You said it was a positive conversation. Was there anything that needed to be cleared up or talked about, or do you just feel like you needed to?
No, look, I just thought it was something that we needed to communicate. There's been a lot of talk outside of our building about trades and things of that nature. And so I just felt like it was probably time that he and I had a conversation. Like I said, it was a positive conversation, and we're looking forward to getting him out here when he's here and working with him.
And like you could take DA's comments at face value. I will say that, generally speaking, a coach is not going to address trade rumors. He's not going to say the word trade conversations.
Right.
And in this case, he made the point to say there's a lot of trade conversations that we're having and that were happening outside of this building.
Yeah.
So that means that he's aware of it. That means that the front office is aware of it. That means that Marshon was aware of it. And to me, that having that conversation and the goal there, knowing that he's probably not going to be there at OTAs, is to be like, we're going, you're on this team, man. And you kind of got to figure it out. And there's been reports of infighting. There's been reports of issues with Marshon last year. Some discontentment with how things were going. There's been reports that the team maybe was a little frustrated with how long it was taking him to recover from certain things. And only Marshon knows whether, that was the case or not, whether he could have played and didn't, from that kidney issue, from that ankle injury last year. But one way or the other, it sure sounds like the goal is to keep him on the roster, and they're not going to be shopping him actively.
Well, and you kind of teased the Cajun Cannon not buying any of what Marshon's selling.
Well, one of the issues before we get into Bobby is Marshon's not selling anything, right? Right.
There's
nothing to buy.
Yeah.
For Marshon. That's the biggest difference between Mike and Marshon in these situations, is that Mike's constantly giving you stuff to kind of be like, what did he mean by that? Should we parse that out? Is it just a Nipsey Hussle lyric, right? Is he just laying in on the Kendrick Drake beef? Or does this mean something? Or should we just kind of not pay attention? Marshon, he is active on Instagram, but it's always workout videos and stuff like that. So honestly, it's not even workout videos. It's just kind of just nothing to write home about. We don't even see workout videos from Marshon really. But he's always in shape. He's always doing the work. But again, we haven't talked to him since the last training camp. So we just don't know what's going on in his head. Because he hasn't told us. And so, yeah, let's hear from Bobby. Let's dive in and talk about whether Well, he's being reasonable, which I think it's going to be a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But let's hear what he had to say.
From a purely talent perspective and what he's achieved on the field, and it's not a big fraternity, but he's the greatest Saints cornerback in Saints history. It's not even close. Now, your influence on the locker room, amongst your teammates, not so much. I think very similar to Michael Thomas. When you guarantee a bunch of money, you better know that player's heart. Better know where they're coming from. No, Michael Thomas and Marshon Lattimore could still play at a high level. I don't know who's guiding them, who's influencing them. But listen, you can have their attitudes if you're playing individual sport. If you're playing golf or tennis, you can do what you want. Because if you win, it's because of you. If you lose, it's all about you. But you're playing a team sport and you influence in the locker room. No. Again, Michael Thomas and Marshon Lattimore, they bad apples. They are bad apples, and then you reward them with a lot of money. Then they could do what the hell what they want, and then they'll give you the middle finger, and then you can't control them. You might have to cut your losses. I can tell you right now, Jim Mora or Sean Payton, Marshon Lattimore's ass would be gone. Dennis Allen's trying to be a player's coach, trying to make it work out. When he said today, I perceive, because right now that Lattimore will be part of the team.
Right, had a positive talk with him.
A positive talk. But listen, a positive talk. No, I'm the coach. You're going to do what the hell I say. I'm the coach. You need to be a good leader. You need to be a good Demario Davis. You need to be a good Cam Jordan. Lattimore is not those individuals.
All right. So one thing I do want to say, and we talked about this before we came on.
Yeah.
You know, the take that the Saints paid Mike and he did nothing after that is not really fair.
No.
Because if you recall, he held out of camp before the 2019 season. They gave him his contract. They made him the highest paid receiver in the NFL, and he responded by catching more passes than anyone in the history of the NFL. So you can't say that he got paid and immediately became an issue. You can say that once he got hurt, that you could argue that the investment wasn't necessarily there because he was no longer in a position where he had to prove himself to the team. But you could make that argument that any player that got paid on that second contract, it's tough. And it is a decision you have to make. And
that's what I mentioned to Bobby. To me, that strife with the Saints and the team, yeah, he had the issue obviously with CD Deuce, but when he got hurt, the issues then became with team doctors. And, you know, I know he got into it with Sean Payton too. And it completely snowballed from there.
Yeah. And I don't know if it was really a money issue. Like,
no, I agree.
I don't think it would have played out any differently in that respect, other than my biggest gripe with it has nothing to do with whether the guy got paid or not. It has to do with I never hear people bring this up when they talk about the salary cap and how the Saints manage it. But the bigger issue isn't that you paid Mike Thomas. It is that the way you paid Mike Thomas and the way you restructured deals made it so you couldn't have moved on from it if you wanted to without taking this massive cap hit and hamstringing yourself in another way. And that's why the Mike Thomas era extended a little longer than it probably should have. That's probably why the Marshon Lattimore era is going to extend a little longer than it should have, because not only are you talking about potentially moving on from one of the greatest players in franchise history, you were talking about doing it in such a way that it actually makes your life more difficult to field his replacement and to field a competitive team without him. And that is a direct consequence of restructuring contracts the way you do. Now, is it because hey, this guy's a rich man now and he's not trying as hard? I don't buy that, because that's just, if you want to keep him around, you have to pay him. Right.
Yeah.
And I heard just as much criticism about not paying CJ.
To me, Marshon is not just, you heard Bobby say the greatest Saints corner in the history of the franchise. Yeah. To me, when healthy, he's top 10, top 15 in the NFL easily.
Yeah. My other issue with Bobby's take is that it is presupposed on this idea that Marshon's not here and that's an issue. But we knew Marshon wasn't going to be here. I could have told you 6 months ago that Marshon was not going to be at OTAs, and it had nothing to do with his trade situation. Which it is funny, in the media room yesterday, I can't remember who it was, but they were asking when did the Marshon conversation start in terms of trading him? Because they were just trying to say like months, 6 months, 8 months, and their answer was like, yeah, whenever the contract restructure went through. And I stopped myself from trying to toot my own horn and be like, actually, I was talking about it in like week 15. But it had nothing to do with, like, it was just something that made sense to me at that time. I'm not saying that I started it, but I was talking about this before anybody else. Anyway, back to the situation at hand. Like, if you were going to have this take about Marshon, you should have been having this take all throughout the last season and all throughout the offseason, not because he's not at OTAs. Like, that should not impact that conversation at all. That said, I do think that in the sense of that locker room last year, and Bobby used the term bad apple in the analogy of like, if there's 2 bad apples in a barrel and you allow it to sit there for a while, the entire barrel will get spoiled because it has an impact on every other apple in that bunch, right? And I can't hate on that metaphor or whatever you want to call it, because I do think that, whether you agree with Mike or you agree with Marshon and they were disgruntled about certain things, yeah. When you're talking about a team dynamic and team chemistry, 2 star players who are not pulling the rope in the same direction and have a really strong grip on it, that will affect your entire team. And I think that did affect the entire team. Now,
and Bobby was bitching about Lattimore last year because he felt at the end of last season he was milking that injury and could have been on the field when the team really could have used him.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you whether Marshon was healthy enough to play or not. Only Marshon can tell you that.
Exactly.
But I can tell you that I have heard the same things about like disgruntled infighting and stuff like that. And we know what was happening with Mike. Right. So it's not exactly hard to kind of envision that scenario where Marshon was not having it and was giving it right back to the coaching staff. And, that's something that if you can fix it, if you can get back to the point where everyone feels like they're pulling the same direction, then yeah, you are better for having Marshon on the field. If you can't, and you end up in a similar situation to last year where the guy ends up going out the door anyway, and he does it in such a way that you have to talk about it even more because it's just a disaster, yeah, that's a problem too. So I don't know. Like, I'm going to give Marshon the benefit of the doubt. We are going to hear from Marshon. He's going to talk eventually. He is going to be there at camp, right? He's not going to hold out because it's too expensive to hold that anyway.
Well, it'll be interesting, obviously, because the mandatory mini camp will be after that June 2nd deadline when the cap hit would go down for a trade.
Yeah. So if he is going to get traded, I don't know. Like, it's funny because now the only reason it would make any sense, it wouldn't make a ton of sense. The only reason it would have made any sense to trade Marshon prior to June 1st was because you were going to be able to get a great asset in the 2024 draft.
Right.
Once the draft went by, you might as well have just fast forwarded your takes to June 1st, because if he is going to get traded,
yeah,
and I think that's a big if, it would make literally 0 sense to do it before June 1st. There would be no upside, and it would only be more expensive for the Saints. And it wouldn't really affect his other team because their camp won't start until July anyway. So
that's why I'm holding my breath on it all, just because obviously, what is Dennis Allen going to say? Of course, he's going to say there's positive conversations. At least there was that, though. I'll say at least him and Marshon were in discussions. But that happened last year, too, with Mike T. He went out to California and had a meeting with him in person. So it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, it's like a little bit of a soap opera going on here.
Oh, yeah. No, I agree. And here's the thing. Like, the Saints are setting the table this way for a reason. And it's the same reason I've been saying, hey, you need to make sure that you can keep out Marshon Lattimore on the roster. That it is not a blow it up because it's going to, before it blows up on you situation, the way it was with CJ Gardner-Johnson, right? And that's what's happening. That's what they're doing. That's what DA's trying to do. Bobby says DA's trying to be a player's coach. And like, yeah, he is trying to be a player's coach. But I disagree with the idea that Sean would have been like, get the fuck out of here. If this was an offensive player, if this was Brandon Cooks, yes. On the defensive side of the ball, it's always going to be on the defensive coach. And I would argue that you would fire the defensive coach before you were forced to trade your star defensive player. And I think that's kind of what DA's trying to figure out right now. And so, yeah, I mean, if this was, if you want to say this is a Brandon Cooks situation on the defense, maybe. But
right.
I don't know.
We haven't heard a closed mouths don't get fed soundbite from a Lattimore. We haven't heard anything from Lattimore.
That is true. And what I will say, and like my final point on Marshon is like, I don't like right now, the Saints are making clear efforts to avoid a situation where you would say they have to trade Marshon.
Agreed.
Right. And for good reason. They should. That said, the whole point of that, in my opinion, is so that people aren't wasting their time making offers that in that vein. Like when other teams know that you are having to trade a guy because you're not going to pay him, because you're not going to do this, you're going to get the L'Jarius Sneed offer.
Well, like Philly did to this Saints with CJ.
Exactly. When a team is like, we need that guy because we feel like that's the missing piece, then you can get an offer more representative of that guy's skill set. And if that doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. But believe you me, I don't care what public face they put forward. If the right offer comes in, Marshon's going somewhere else. But it has to be the right offer.
And a problem with that, obviously, we know the talent is there, but we haven't seen it the last 2 years because of injuries.
Well, because of injuries, but also I don't think he had a great season last year, even before the injuries. Like he had a really good week 1. He just toasted DeAndre Hopkins.
Right.
But from like week 4 on, from like the Bucks game on, he got toasted by Mike Evans. That was the first time I've ever seen Mike Evans win that matchup.
Yeah, I agree.
He did. Then he got kind of eaten up by the kid out in Houston, Nico Collins.
Right.
You know, he lost that matchup. And you know, I would argue that he was not that dominant player. He did play well against the Jags. I'll give him that. But I don't think he was the dominant player that you needed to see for several games that year. So I don't know. Yeah, and I'd like to see him get back to that, because I think when you do have that, this defense is a lot different. You can play without him, but you're better with him. So we'll see. But I'm not as openly hostile about it as Bobby is going to be.
Yeah, to hear the bad apple comment, I just never got really that take or feel from Marshon at all. But I could be wrong.
I think Bobby is reacting to a vacuum in a way that is probably unreasonable, because that's what you're reacting to. You're reacting to a vacuum. And if you want to criticize Marshon for one thing specifically, it's that he's allowed it to be a vacuum. It is that he has not talked. Sure. He has not made this any easier for himself. He has not created a scenario where we can even say this is what he said and versus this is what the situation is being presented as. He's done nothing in that regard.
And
he doesn't like to talk to the media.
I don't even know if it's true, but supposedly there was reports of there was a trade proposed that he would end up on Houston on Instagram, and he liked the post on it. And I was like, I don't know. I can't read into that crap.
I hate that internet sleuthing shit so much. Because, like, sure, maybe he did, but who knows? Who knows if he's even in control of his Instagram account?
Yeah, sure.
So I don't know, but I'm not getting into that. And heck, maybe he does want to play for Houston. Who knows? Again, who knows? But it's a vacuum. Like that's a good example of like we have so little to go on that's considered information.
Silence can be damning too, though. I'll say that obviously.
It creates a situation where people are gonna be able to put their own
spin on it,
opinions and takes into the world, and there's nothing to rebut it. And that's what's happening with Marshon. And if you give Bobby the keys and say drive us anywhere, he's gonna find somewhere where you're like, well, what are we doing here?
Yeah,
you know
what's going on?
and I get it. That's why listening to him is a wild ride. But I think he is a little over the wall, over the fence on this one. But again, until Marshon does something to prove otherwise, so we'll see. That's all I got.
Yeah, hopefully I guess there's no reversing of if being a bad apple, you can't become fresh and new again.
Yeah, I mean, well, unless you're trying to, sell sour apples, in which case then you got exactly what you were looking for. Get a whole bushel of sour apples, and that was the plan all along. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's metaphor.
From a lot of what you hear from fans, I just think that folks think it's going to be too easy to just plug the outside with Paulson, Adebo, Alontae Taylor, and then put Kool-Aid in the slot, and bing, bang, boom, you're solved with no Marshon. I don't think it's that easy.
I mean, I do think that you are in a situation where you could move on from Marshon with limited damage to your kind of bottom line talent level.
Yeah.
Because you are. That said, you don't want to if you don't have to.
But I was going to say, none of those guys are Lattimore, obviously.
Right. So we'll see. But all right, I think we've talked that to death. Another long podcast, but
that's what we do.
People have been engaging. People have been listening. So apparently it's not too long. Either way, thanks everyone for listening. Another episode of Inside Black and Gold in the books. We will have our next episode prior to week 2 of OTAs, and then we'll have another kind of reaction episode later in the week. I want to talk about kind of dark horses to make the roster, kind of guys I want to see more from. Maybe that's what we can talk about in the next episode.
Yeah.
Either way, good stuff. Let's do it. All right. What you got, Steve?
Just going to say, have a great Memorial Day, Hoodats.
Ooh, Memorial Day. Make sure to tweet about it.
Yeah.
All right. Who dat? Go Saints.
Go America.
Peace.